Today, we'll look at how to build on-demand reports. Report 1. You want a list of subscribers with product 1024 who paid at least $5 for voice calls, not included in their free minutes bundle, during the last month in order to target them with a special promotion. The list should include subscriber name, total number of calls, average call duration in minutes, and amount spent. Connecting to a data source. First, log into the server, and then start creating a report in a new workbook. A Tableau workbook is very similar to an Excel workbook and also consists of sheets. When opening a new workbook, you'll be asked which data source you want to connect to. Live data source versus data extracts. You can connect to a live data source or use data extracts, which are like snapshots of data at a certain date and time, indicated by a timestamp. Live data sources are typically used to quickly build ad hoc reports. They allow you to access all available fields in the data source and aggregate and filter them at your convenience. However, queries are sent directly to the data source containing the raw data, and so may require significant processing time. If a report you've built seems especially useful, you can cache the data periodically. PortaBI's out-of-the-box reports makes use of data snapshots. For example, here you can see when by revenue profit report data extract was last cached. Pre-processed cached data sources load much faster and are recommended for frequently used reports. You can choose a specific data source or search for a matching one by typing, for example, subscriber. For this report, let's choose subscriber transactions. Now click Connect in the bottom right corner, and you're ready to start building your on-demand report. The difference between dimensions and measures. Once all the data has been loaded, on the left side of the screen, you will see the different fields located in your dataset. These fields are divided into two types: dimensions and measures. Dimensions are like the row or column headers in an Excel spreadsheet. Dimensions contain quantitative values such as names, dates, customer names, product names, etc. You can use dimensions to categorize, segment, and display details in your data. Dimensions are what you use to break down your metrics, while measures are the metrics themselves. Measures contain numerical, quantitative values that can be measured: revenue, number of calls, number of new product activations, etc. Measures can be aggregated. When you drag a measure into the view, Tableau applies aggregation by default. In other words, it collects the individual row values from your data source into a single value. When opening a workbook to build a custom report and load a data source, you should do a quick check to see that everything makes sense. Occasionally, you'll find measures that are numerical, such as product IDs. Although you won't use these for numerical operations such as adding, subtracting, and so on, you may need them as column or row headers, so it's better to convert them to your dimensions. Just right-click a specific measure and select Convert to Dimension. Why convert dimensions into measures or vice versa? The reason for converting measures to dimensions is that each has a different functionality within Tableau. For example, if a product ID is saved as a measure, anytime you bring it into view, Tableau will try to sum it or get an average for it. It won't create headers like dimensions would, and certain chart types won't be available either. As mentioned before, measures are your metrics, so a categorical variable such as product ID should be saved as a dimension, since you use it to slice, filter, or group your data. For example, if you want to look at sales by product or reseller, the part that comes after by is a dimension. Once your dimensions and measures have been organized, you're ready to start building the report. It's a good idea first to limit your data source by adding some dimensions to the filters section. Using filters. Adding filters to limit data and reduce load time. When working with a large data source, the first thing to do is set up any filters needed to build your report. Here's an example that shows why. If you bring customer names into your rows, you see that there are 7,214 customers. You only want to build a report containing customers with over $5 of revenue in March 2020. Probably a lot fewer customers will fall into that category. Also, having filters in place from the beginning will speed up load times when building the report. So let's remove the customer name and bring the transaction date into your filters twice. For the custom report you are building, you want to have both a discrete year and a discrete month. The difference between the two sets of dates is that the top ones are discrete dates, whereas the bottom ones are continuous. Click on the drop-down and choose the first set of dates from the menu. Go where it says Year 2015. There is a tiny glitch in the current version of Tableau Server Web UI. You need to right-click the filter to hide it and then show it again. Then it will show up on the right side of the screen. Now, for the second filter, let's go to where it says Month May. And then open the Filter dialog box and choose March. Now you have the March 2020 data. Then you'll add a product name filter, in this case, Product 1024. Then add a filter by service name as well. Let's talk about the difference between the two types of dates. Let's open a new workbook in a new window for this and connect it to the same subscriber transactions data source. Discrete versus continuous dates in Tableau. It's easy to distinguish discrete from continuous dates. Discrete dates are always blue, while continuous are always green. Let's bring the year of the transaction date into your columns and the revenue into your rows. Click on the plus sign twice to add the month. Then remove quarter by dragging it off the worksheet. Default dates will usually be discrete ones, the first set of dates from the dropdown. The second set of dates in the dropdown will be continuous dates. Bring the transaction date into your filters and choose Year 2015 from the first set of dates from the dropdown. And then bring the transaction date into the filters again and choose Month May from the first set of dates in the dropdown. Don't forget about the glitch mentioned before. On the right side of the screen, you can tick off the year or the months for which you don't want to see the revenue. A discrete date filter shows different individual dates, not all the dates together. One way to better understand discrete versus continuous dates is to think about the American school grading system, which uses letters and numbers. The letter grades can be A, B, C, D, or F, while the percentage grades range from 0 to 100. In this analogy, the letters are like discrete dates and the numbers are like continuous dates. Dropdowns and relevant values. How to display filters. One very important thing about filters is that there are different ways to view them. Dropdowns are almost always the best option since they take up less space on the dashboard. And unless you need to see the list of values, it's usually a good idea to switch to a more concise view. One option is to show all values in the data source. This fills the quick filter list with all the values for a given field in the data source. Another option is only relevant values, meaning that the quick filter list will show only the values that remain after applying the other filters. This second option is quite useful. Here you see that all of your service names are selected. Let's bring the revenue into text. The total revenue is $10,070. If we remove DID usage and equipment, this number does not change. This might seem very strange to users. The services have changed, so why is there no revenue change? If you choose from the dropdown to show only relevant values, then only those numbers that are relevant after applying these two filters will be shown, and the numbers will update accordingly. Now let's remove the revenue from our view and select only voice calls in the filter dialog box. Now grab the customer name and bring it into rows. After doing that, you'll see on the very bottom left how many customers remain. As you can see, it went from 7,214 to 141 customers. So adding these filters is usually the best practice when starting to build your report. Measure names and measure values. Placeholder fields in Tableau. Next, you need to bring in your measure values and measure names. Measure names and values are used to keep your metrics separate. In an Excel sheet, each column is usually a different metric, but in Tableau, it doesn't work that way by default. In order to separate your metrics into columns, you need to use measure names to give them headers and measure values to separate them. These italicized fields are generated by Tableau, so they don't actually exist in the dataset. Tableau adds them as placeholders just to give you some extra capabilities. Measure values are simply a list of all your metrics in one field, while measure names list all the headers for each of the metrics, also in one field. What happens if you don't use placeholders? Let's see what would happen if you didn't use measure values. Let's bring in two metrics into text: revenue and cost. Without measure names and measure values, there would be no headers. Users would see only the bare numbers, without any idea what these numbers mean, unless they scroll and hover over them. If you print out this report, send it to a crosstab, or view it in Excel, there will be no indication of what any of the numbers are. For example, if you want to see two metrics, Tableau will stack them right on top of each other in the same cell, again with no headers. Using measure values and names enables you to build different types of charts and do different types of calculations that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Let's remove cost and revenue from your view now. If you scroll down to the very bottom, this is where measure values are located. Now let's drop measure values in the text shelf on the marks card. The marks card is used to set the mark type and encode your data with color, size, shape, text, and detail. At this point, Tableau puts all the metrics right on top of each other, so they're just a bunch of numbers that are not readable. This is why you need to find the measure names and bring them into the columns. Doing that will separate the values into different columns. Once you do that, Tableau automatically adds measure names to the filters. If you want to show only some of the metrics, you can do so by just dragging the rest of them off the measure value shelf. So let's click and drag them and remove them from the view. An even better way to do this is by going to the Measure Names filter and removing whichever ones you don't want directly from there. Here, let's just show revenue, used time, and transaction quantity. These will appear on the left in a new shelf called Measure Values. By default, they are in alphabetical order, but you can arrange them by dragging them up or down. Filtering customers by revenue. Now let's look only at customers with over $5 in revenue by adding an additional filter. This filter wasn't added before now just to show that there are customers who do not meet this criterion. When you drag the revenue field from measures to filters, Tableau aggregates it by default. Well, that's fine, because you want it aggregated before applying the new filter. As already mentioned, your aim is to view customers who have more than $5 in revenue. To do this, go down here to Revenue Filter dialog box. Change this here to 5 and press Enter. Now you're only showing customers with $5 or more in revenue for March 2020. Sorting customers. You can sort customers by revenue in descending order. Click on Customer Name, then Sort, and choose Descending, and then by field. You should also select the field name Revenue from the dropdown. After you click on the X here, the customers will be sorted by descending revenue. Let's also change the fit here. Click on the dropdown, set it to Fit With, and now you can see all of the column headers. Then you can just drag this to the right to show the customer name. Renaming fields. In Tableau Server, only the names of actual fields can be changed. Let's rename transaction quantity to number of calls. You can rename the use time to call time in seconds in the same way. Tableau Server does not allow you to keep the same field name as in the data source while changing how the user sees it. Instead, both measures and dimensions have to be renamed. Also, you are changing these names only for this specific workbook. If you open a new workbook, the original names will be shown. Creating new calculated measures. You want to see the call volume in minutes, not seconds. To do that, go over to call time and duplicate it. This will create a new measure field with the same name. Now change the field name to call time in minutes here, and then edit it. Divide the call volume in seconds by 60 to get the call volume in minutes. To add this to your view, just go down to your newly created measure and drag it to the bottom of the measure values. Then remove the time in seconds from the report because you don't need it anymore. Renaming the worksheet. The last thing to do is give your worksheet a title. If you change the tab name to Revenue by Customer first by default, the tab name and the sheet title will be the same. But you can edit them separately. For example, if you title your sheet Customers with greater than or equal to $5 in revenue, this doesn't change the tab name. Saving your workbook. To save your report, just go to File and choose Save As. When Tableau asks you for the name of the workbook, call it Tableau Demo. Then you'll be asked which project you want to save it in. Just navigate to where you want to save it. If you've created multiple sheets, there's the option to show them as tabs at the top of the report. You can also build dashboard buttons into your worksheets to allow users to navigate between the different views. To do this, you either need to display the sheets as tabs or create the appropriate buttons. If you choose the Embedded Password option, the credentials you use to connect to the data source will be saved, and users will be able to log into a worksheet or a dashboard without entering a password. Since the password is embedded in the workbook, users will have access to the data in the view as long as they are logged into Tableau. Downloading a worksheet. After you have finished building the report, you can download the worksheet using the download option at the top right. There are several different ways to do this. You can download just a screen image or download the data used to build the report as a crosstab. You also have the option of downloading the workbook or specific worksheets as a PDF or PowerPoint file, as well as saving a local copy of the workbook. Let's save this workbook in the Test Report project. Summary. In the first part of this tutorial, you learned how to build an on-demand report from scratch, what the difference is between dimensions and measures, how to use filters, and why it is important to set up filters when starting to build your report. You also found out about the difference between discrete and continuous dates, how to use measure names and values, and how to do some basic formatting.